Audio check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening. My name is Steve Goldstein. I'll be the moderator for this evening's conversation. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona Debates, so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. All registered voters can vote in the general election, which will be held on November 5th. Voter registration deadline is October 7th. Early voting is on October 9th. If you're watching this debate with us live, you can submit a question at any time. There are three ways to do it. One is by emailing us at debates@kc-a.com. That's debates@kc-a.com. You can text us at 408-302-1810. You can also call 480-937-1253. We may not get to all audience questions, but we'll certainly do our best. Tonight, we'll be hearing from a candidate in Legislative District 2, which covers parts of North Phoenix. Because only one candidate is with us, this will be a one-on-one conversation rather than a debate between or among candidates. And to our candidate, you'll have 1 minute for an opening and closing statement and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions, but we'll be a little bit loose on that based on the conversation you and I are having. Our goal tonight is obviously to connect candidates and voters so the electorate can vote informed. Let me give you a list of the candidates running for the state Senate in LD2. Republican Shauna Bolick, Democrat Judy Schwiebert, Dennis Pugsley of the Green Party. All of them were invited to take part, but declined. And in the House, voters get to vote for 2 candidates. Your candidates are Republican Ari Daniel Bradshaw, Republican Justin Wilmoth, Democrat Stephanie Simicek, and Independent Thomas Symes. All 4 of them were invited, but only one of them, Ari Daniel Bradshaw, agreed to be with us. And now let us bring in that House candidate, Ari Daniel Bradshaw. Mr. Bradshaw, thanks very much for being with us. Time for your opening statement. You have 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for all the clean elections, for the hard work you do to inform the voters. That's such an important role. It's something I talk about with voters all the time, is making sure that they're informed on the candidates running for office and what those offices actually do. I'm a 4th-generation Phoenician. I'm the only Arizonan actually running in this race. I was born and raised around the Phoenix Valley. My grandparents are Democrats in the district. I'm a Republican. And I'm running because I was really upset with the direction that I saw our politics going, with negativity and lies and smear tactics and extremism fostering itself on both sides of the aisle. And so I really wanted to be a part of the change that I wanted to see. And, instead of looking at our political scene and saying, hey, the far right here and the far right left and all the lies and negativity, I wanted to try and bring a more nonpartisan approach that focuses on issues that matter to our community over any national party interest. And so I've been proudly endorsed by a lot of nonpartisan organizations, such as the Humane the Humane Voters of Arizona, the Arizona Tech Council, the Multi-Housing Association. And I really have been trying my hardest to represent the values of my district over anything else. I grew up here. I know the people of this district. We are a people who really don't want to invest into these radical ideologies on the left or the right. We want common sense leadership that knows how to understand negotiation with the other side, respects bipartisanship, and really tries to heal this divide in the nation that we've seen grow over the past 10 years. I want to be part of the solution and the healing. That's why I've run a positive campaign. I haven't run negativity on any of my opponents, and I'm solely focused on the issues which matter to the people of LD2. I would be honored to earn one of their 2 votes. I don't mind if you're a registered Democrat, Republican, Green, Independent, anything above. I'm trying to represent the people of this district. When I knock doors, I knock everybody's door, because if I'm elected to represent the people of this district, I want them to know that I'm listening to them. They have a voice and that they have someone who they can talk to. We may not always agree, but I will always hear you out. And I always tell folk, people in this world, everyone has something you can learn from. Every single person in this world has something that they can impart upon others that makes the world go round and that educates them. So I'm a firm believer in giving everyone their voice and making sure that we are not ignoring any segments of our population here in LD2.
I'm excited to get into some of your philosophy a little bit later, for sure, in the broader sense. So let's start with some issues that have been discussed quite a bit and that are very important to Arizona voters. One is housing prices, which you being a 4th generation, I've lived in Arizona for 40 plus years, and it certainly was a place, and certainly compared to one of our neighbors, we are still less expensive, but it is still a very hard place to afford to live, to buy a person's own home. What sort of plan would you advocate for housing affordability or increasing the possibility here in the state?
I love that question. And I think we need a multifaceted approach. No one solution is going to solve everything. So when I was born, around 25% of all the new constructions in Arizona were single family starter homes from 800 to 1,300 square feet. Today, Last time I saw the number is around 8%. So what we're doing is we're disincentivizing developers from constructing the types of homes that people actually want to buy and can afford for their starter homes. Instead, what we've done, in part due to the disequalization of the 100-year water guarantee on rentals and build for sales, is that we've incentivized developers to build a lot more small residency, studio apartment style for rent only, or multi-housing for rent only constructions on areas where they cannot get the 100 years of secured water. So we are disincentivizing developers through numerous tax policies and through the 100-year water guarantee from actually constructing the types of homes that my generation wants to buy and wants to be able to afford. Another thing that we can do is we can take a look at the fact that right now, for example, in Tolleson, there is a company which has purchased, last time I checked, around 30% of all the homes there, and it's a foreign company from Canada. What are we doing to protect Arizonan buyers and make sure that we are prioritizing Arizonan first-time home buyers and people who are trying to own their primary residence over investors from overseas? I think looking at depreciation law is a way that we can go about this. And we really need to find a way to put Arizonan families first when it comes to purchasing homes. I'm a firm believer that we want to see our homeownership rates go up. And that's why I'm opposed to policies that have to do with rent control that would destroy our local landlord industry and the ability for small-time people to enter that business. And instead, we would wind up seeing BlackRock, Vanguard, and other entities buy up all of the homes, never sell them, and continue to raise rent prices. Over in Missoula, I have some friends who moved there. BlackRock bought all the homes there, no pets allowed. We can't, I'm a firm believer that we need to have people own their own homes, build generational wealth. And I want to focus on policies which help my generation, the generation above me, millennials, and the one below me, Gen Alpha, actually be able to afford a home. I want to see homeownership rates go up, and I'm willing to work with multiple industries in order to make that happen. Another thing I think we definitely need to do is let's go write another HCM asking Congress to sell some of the federal lands to Arizona. We are one of the states which has the highest ratios of federal land being owned by the feds instead of owned by us. And so we can get some of these lands back, obviously not in areas where it would be environmentally detrimental. I'm a big environmentalist, and I'd love to get into that. But we need to focus as well on making sure that we have sustainable room to grow in areas where we can get that 100-year water guarantee for homes, so we're not destroying our environment, we're having sustainable growth, and we're prioritizing the families that grew up here to be able to afford homes here instead of either enter rental slavery or have to move out due to prices just being, quite frankly, too high.
There are a lot of communities in the state that practice NIMBY, shall we say, not in my backyard. How do we make it so, in addition to what you said, is there a possibility of having an attitude shift where we have certain communities where people who work in those communities, and I'll throw out nurses, teachers, whatever, may not be able to actually afford to live in those communities? I know that's more philosophical, but when you're talking about working with both sides, is there a way of bringing about an attitude shift, maybe because of your generation, maybe because of your other approach?
Totally. So what I've noticed, my former Senator Steve Kaiser, he was introducing housing bills with Annalise Ortiz, a Democrat. One of my best friends this past year was Democratic Whip Melody Hernandez. She's another young person in her 20s who's got involved because she wanted to see a change in how politics was being done. And something that I think that people on both sides of the aisle on this younger spectrum see is we need to find out a way to get homeownership rates higher. Now, there's different perspectives in how we get there, but having those conversations and being open with one another results in bills such as the Kaiser Ortiz bill, which was a bipartisan compromise. We had 3 different bills. I agreed, I forget exactly what the details of them all were, but I agreed with about 2 of the 3 that were presented. And that's something that we need to work on next year as well, is working with the 9-4, with the governor's office, and with people on both sides of the aisle to say, housing is not a partisan issue. Seeing our homeownership rates go up and seeing the next generation build generational wealth, we're all on board with that. So how can we work together in a positive way to actually look at the data? I'm a data nerd. I run a advertising company, and so data is super important to me. Let's look at the data, look at how plans have worked in other states and in other countries, and figure out what can work if we try it out here. Does it have to be at the state level, municipal level, county level, or do we have to go right in HCM and ask Congress for help on certain things? We have to look at the data before making these decisions, and I'm a firm believer that housing is a bipartisan issue.
Well, let's go into what you said is one of your favorite things to talk about, the environment. And let's start with water, which, I mean, this is a place that people wonder, well, how can people live in the desert? And this is an area that's been known for being innovative when it comes to that. But we still face serious problems when it comes to making sure we have enough water, making sure we're not using too much, making sure that when we bring companies in, that if we build certain things, they're not using too much water. So let's talk about water initially. What are some of your thoughts that you'd like to see done at the legislative and gubernatorial level?
So I am I'm the only candidate in this race endorsed by a member of our nonpartisan CAWCD water board in Maricopa County. That's our water board that regulates the CAP, the Central Arizona Project. I'm also the only candidate endorsed by the sponsor of the bipartisan Rio Verde bill, which passed last year. And that's because I am a huge water nerd. Being a fourth generation Arizonan, this is something where I have been deep into the water weeds for my entire life. I did a whole 10-minute long video with Amanda Moniz from the water board on water last year. And we've gone right now, we're in, I believe, a tier 2 shortage. We were in a tier 3 shortage before. So things have gotten better due to the restrictions, which we do have on the books and which we did follow. That's key, that we're following our restrictions. Arizona, we do a decent job with water management. It's just a matter of we have to have sustainable growth. We have to prevent foreign entities from pumping infinite groundwater. And I love what Attorney General Chris Mays has been doing on that front. I think that we should continue pursuing that route, as well as I think that I agree with Representative Alexander Culloden on introducing a statewide water market. So right now, we have overflowing aquifers in a area where water's overflowing and we basically have to send it down the river. We are not allowed to sell that water to an area where the water aquifer is depleted, such as, Rio Verde aquifer last year. If we had a statewide water market, we could alleviate a lot of the bureaucratic concerns that have to do with our water management, because Arizona, we do a fantastic job of water management. And so it's a matter of how do we take the steps to go forward and continue to do a fantastic job of water management while fixing policies that we introduced decades ago, just to make them better for the modern era. Another thing that I would love to do, and I've already began conversations with Congressman Schweikert about this, and with Abe Hamadeh, who will hopefully represent the other half of my district coming this November. And we've talked about having the legislature write an HCM that says, can the federal government, which currently invests around $30 billion per year in water, can they invest an extra $5 to $10 billion on Israeli-style desalination plants along Southern California, Orange County, San Diego County, under the condition that upon completion and full funding federally of those desalination plants, which at current rates would get us around 5 to 10 million acre feet of water per year, it's a lot. Under that condition, that California either renegotiates its priority status or withdraws from the Colorado River Compact, which currently in the lower basin, Colorado receives 5 million acre feet from, whereas Arizona is currently the last priority level if we are in a shortage, which we currently are. So I would love to work on a multifaceted approach where we're changing our guarantees on water, where we are changing our statewide water policies, where we are writing to Congress and trying to negotiate with them. Dealing with our water issues is truly something where we need to be working vertically with the counties, the states, the water boards, and the federal government in order to do the overall right thing for Arizonans, preserving their water for the next generation and making sure that just as my grandparents were born here, my grandkids can also be born here, and their grandkids, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, something somewhat related to that has to do with the urban heat island, which we know obviously it's September 25th, and it was 109 degrees today. So we know there are certain things that we will have to deal with as a desert, regardless of whether climate change is human caused or whether it is cyclical and caused by nature. That's not the basis of my question. The basis of my question is, what are some ways you see to make this a more sustainable place, realizing that, again, climate change, man-caused or not, is making it hotter here?
Yeah, I just had lunch with the former chairman of the Arizona Young Democrats. We have a relationship going back to when I was the chairman of a Young Republicans organization. And we were actually chatting about this exact issue and how we can work on looking at the data to say what works, what doesn't work. And so I haven't seen many promising studies from the whole paving the roads, the different color thing. I'm open to that if it works, but I haven't seen many promising things yet. What I have seen that's really promising is trees. Trees are awesome. Trees decrease temperature, and they also, for whatever reason, I don't know how to explain it, they decrease crime. So the more trees we have, simultaneously we lower the crime rate and we lower temperatures in the urban heat island that we're seeing. And by trees, I do not mean palm trees. Palm trees are wasteful with water. They look pretty, but we shouldn't be investing state resources to plant more palm trees. They are not good for water and they don't do much to reduce the heat. But planting native trees, huge. Every study I've seen shows that makes the strongest direct impact when government takes action to lower heat in an urban municipality. And so I'm a huge fan of afforestation. I actually have a video running as an ad right now talking about how Arizona, we've lost 14% of our tree cover since 2000 due to the bark beetle epidemic, due to forest fires, and due to many different things. So let's introduce bills to study and address the bark beetle epidemic, making sure that we can push them back before they reach Payson and destroy Payson's beauty. And let's also invest into afforestation within our urban environments in Tucson and in Phoenix, so we can lower the impact of heat.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I don't want to give you whiplash. We're going to go to a totally different topic right now.
Totally.
Let me ask you about, I'm going to separate these issues. I'm going to separate the issue of border security from immigration. But your party is gung-ho in a lot of things. Proposition 314, which is on the ballot. Some have derisively compared it to SB 1070, but those who support it say totally different. But it would make it a state crime to be in the country illegally, require local enforcement to enforce the law. Give me a general idea of, just, it could be a brief answer on Prop 314, whether you'd vote yes or no. But beyond that, are there certain things you'd like to see the state try to do that perhaps balances what you're talking about, just generally acting humanely, but also protecting the state?
I love that you said that. Acting humanely is huge. We need to treat people with respect. Humans are humans. And just because of someone's legal or illegal status doesn't change the fact that they are a human who's deserving of mutual respect in the golden rule. And so that's something that we need to first take into account. So there was some bill earlier this year that was like a shoot on entry bill, which was crazy. We need to oppose things like that and call it out when it happens. I'm a big believer that we need to reopen checkpoints at areas such as Sasabe and Arivaca if we haven't already opened them. We also need to make sure that if people are entering to claim asylum, they do so at a legal point of entry. I've been to the border twice, yo hablo español, and when I was speaking to the people crossing the border, not one was actually coming from Mexico. Last time I was there, they were coming from Chile, from Georgia, from India, from Venezuela, from so many other countries. And we can't, it's a much more difficult situation than I think a lot of people realize. And they're not crossing at legal points of entry. They're crossing at areas where they're being loaded into buses, told false information by cartels who help port them across. And we need to really do something about trying to use whatever state policy we can to get these people to enter at legal points of entry if they're going to be claiming asylum. Now, for federal policy, my sister's husband has been trying to legally immigrate to the United States for over a year, and it's been a pain. We need serious legal immigration reform on the federal front. I'd be happy to write an HCM, a bipartisan HCM, asking for some sort of immigration reform, but that has to come from the federal level when we talk about how legal immigration occurs. From the state level, let's reopen our checkpoints, let's fund our border security wherever we can. When it comes to that proposition, just so I don't ignore that part of the question as well, the stats that I saw from the latest Noble Insights poll, which is a pretty centrist poll overall from what I've seen in their reporting or in their results, I saw that 50% of Democrats support this proposition, whereas 50% of Democrats would never support SB 1070. So I've heard the comparison be made by a couple of politicians before. I think it's a different bill, and I think that Democrats are really seeing it as a different bill, considering that, I mean, from that poll, even if it's off by 10, 20 points, you can't even get 30% of Democrats say they agree with SB 1070. So 50% saying they agree with this proposition, I think it's a much more measured and common sense border initiative. Personally, I have not made my decision on all of the props yet. I'm going to go through and make that decision. I know for a fact I'm voting no on the Make Elections Fair initiative, just because I think that that goes a bit too far. I think what would be cool is let's see some sort of election changing in how we operate our primaries. And I'm totally open to seeing ideas to bring third parties into the system, but we have to do it incrementally. I don't think this radical all-in-one change is what we should be doing. I think it throws way too many wild cards into the system, opens up way too many Pandora's boxes. We should be doing incremental change. In general, I'm a believer with some of these massive, massive changes that some people want to make. They need to be incremental change.
All right, let me come back briefly to one more border security and immigration related question. And that is, do you think that there is a crisis at the border? That's part one. And part two is we've heard many legal cases decide this as well, that regardless of the frustration that many people have on whatever side of the aisle they are with the way the border is going, it is still a federal issue. So so Arizona's hands are tied to some extent. You mentioned HCMs, and that's certainly fine. Tell me whether you think it's a crisis and whether you think that Arizona can act, quote unquote, alone on this.
Yeah, I think the federal government needs to be involved. At the end of the day, this is a problem which the federal government needs to solve. I have seen bipartisan solutions to the immigration crisis that aren't perfect, but they exist. I've seen Republican ones. I haven't seen any pure Dem ones. I'd love to see ones. I'm a believer that everyone who has common sense sees that we have, whether you want to call it a crisis humanitarian-wise or crisis in terms of the raw numbers that are coming in, it needs to be addressed. I mean, Biden has called it a crisis. My opponent on the Democratic side has called it a crisis that she wants to address. I think it's something that absolutely is a problem. But how do we go about solving it? It needs to stay away from all the politicized rhetoric and stay away from all of these hyper-politicized terms. And we need to start saying, what do the numbers say? How many people are coming across? How many are being in by border security? How many are not being caught by border security? What is happening to the people who come across? Are they staying in one area? We need to know. It's a much more multifaceted problem that I personally think has been oversimplified by both sides of the aisle and really done a disservice to the overall political conversation, to where people start talking about, look at this video of people barging in, or look at these numbers which show that we're actually doing a better job of processing people who come across. The story is not one way or the other. The story is so much more complex, and I think it deserves a representative and it deserves representation in our government, especially at the federal level, and the state as well, who recognizes that it's not talking points and that we have to be looking at data and making data-based decisions. 90% of decisions we make in our government should be data-based decisions. It should not be these ideological culture war nonsense decisions. We should be able to look at the data and say what will work, what will not work, what has worked in the past, and what are the current problems. So if we're having too many people come across and they're not being vetted properly, I know, for example, in my community, the Jewish community, there's a lot of fears over sleeper cells. Do we have sleeper cell agents of organizations that would like to eliminate Jews from the face of the planet? That's a serious fear that I talk about with Jewish constituents. And I've gone to many synagogues around the area over my life, and especially in the past year. It's a real concern that people have. So how do we make sure that we're alleviating those fears? Another thing I'll bring up before we move on to the next topic is I'm friends with Mining Inspector Paul Marsh, our mining inspector statewide. And he was explaining to me as we went on a mine tour last year that we have some mines in southern Arizona which he doesn't send his people to reclaim or otherwise, because there's fears that there are armed migrants from gangs or otherwise hiding out within those mines. And he says, hey, until I get some sort of federal support in order to go in here, I can't risk state employees going in there. I'd love to go check that out. Can we get an investigation into what's happening there? And then can we make a request to the federal government? These are things which I think we need to have raw data on before we go about prescribing solutions. And just as you say, a lot of this needs to come from the federal government. The state should not be overexerting itself. We have Article 4, Section 4, but we cannot be overexerting our state powers. That would be a grave mistake. We'd wind up getting sued by the Supreme Court, and it'd be an embarrassment. We need to stop embarrassing ourselves.
I know, really briefly, did the mine inspector say there was any evidence that this was going on, or he was just afraid of it, like afraid of the possibility?
He had said that was something that he had seen in the lower mines and that had been reported to him. I haven't seen any. I'd love for there to be a news investigation in that area. Maybe that's something that could happen. I'm just reporting secondhand what I was told and by a source who I trust.
Okay. We've got a few minutes left. I want to get to a number of things.
Sure. Let me ask you
about reproductive rights.
Of course.
And I'm going to let you go into depth on it, but okay. 1864, 15-week ban, or Arizona Abortion Access Initiative. If you were to say you support one of those three more than others, what would it be?
I was the first candidate in this race to call for the repeal of that 1864 ban. My opponent is really bizarrely running ads saying Ari Bradshaw will ban abortions. I am like a total libertarian on let's separate this from the legislators, because we have the VRA in Arizona. They got a record number of signatures to put that on the ballot. The voters are going to make their vote on it. And however the voters decide, that's the law of the land. The legislators can't go in and change the law after that. If they want to change the law to be more pro-choice or pro-life after the fact, what they need to do is get enough signatures to put it on the ballot again. I am really confused as to why my opponent is running just blatant lies about my position on this issue, because I literally was the first person to call for the repeal of it. I've been running ads to my district talking about how I supported repealing this 1864 law for a long time. I think the voters should decide this law. Honest to God, this is not an issue that the legislators need to decide. It's the number one single issue voter issue in the nation, and more people make their vote if this is attached to a politician than any other issue. So I think it's best, and I think the people have really asked for it and gotten what they received with this initiative, for it to be separated from the legislature, separated from the politicians. Let this issue be decided by the people of Arizona so that when they vote on their legislators can focus on the budget, on education, making sure that we have best public schools in the country instead of the worst public schools in the country, and making sure that we can actually focus on our environment, our resource management, and growing our economy sustainably.
You gave me a great segue. What are your thoughts on empowerment scholarship accounts, whether they should be somewhat restricted, because it was a successful program in Arizona, and then it was expanded, and some are concerned about where the money's going, who's spending it, whatnot. Give me your general ideas and thoughts on that. Would you like to see some ESA reform? Or are you supportive of as much as possible?
So I am a product of school choice. I had gone to our public schools in the PVUSD and SUSD systems, and I was not doing well in them, not because I wasn't tuned to the schools, but because it wasn't my learning style or values. So I received, I believe it was called an STO before the ESA program to attend a school, and I went to a great private school that best fit my learning style and values. I'm a big believer that we need to fund excellent options for every child, no matter their income or their zip code. And that means that we need to have options for children, and that we shouldn't be limiting them in those options. So this past year's budget, education came in $4 million under. The budget before, it was over. So long as the ESA program fits within our budget, I think it's a good program. Now, if it gets to the point where the fear mongers say, oh, it'll bankrupt the state, which is not what the budget results show, then at that point we can look at, okay, how do we make this economically viable? Because at the end of the day, children like me who grew up in a single mother household on welfare deserve to have the same opportunities that any other child in this state has. And we shouldn't be taking away those opportunities just because people are afraid of how certain folk are spending the money. Should we see increased transparency? I think any transparency measures are great, but we should also see transparency measures in our public schools. I'm the biggest supporter of funding our public schools. I'm the only candidate in this race who went to our public schools. I want to lift or eliminate the AEL so we can fully fund them. And education needs to be, just as it already is in our budget, the number one thing that we are using our taxpayer dollars for. The next generation is too important. We need to turn around our public school performance. We have the best charters in the nation. We have some of the best privates. Let's work on getting the best publics without taking away choices from those who have opted into other options.
All right, let me just ask you a quick question. If you, as you mentioned, you were growing up in a circumstance that a large majority of the state, obviously don't have the numbers, so I don't make that assumption, but would say, yes, we want to make sure that people who may come from lower income households are given an opportunity. But the others who are expressing concern about the way ESAs have expanded, they're saying, well, what about those who come from wealthy households? Why should they be given the same opportunity when they have money for themselves to make those choices? I wonder what you think about that.
So that's where, just as I was saying, if in the long term any changes would need to be made, I've talked with folk about this. I think what would make most common sense, so long as it's not a 14th Amendment violation, which it may be, in which case we couldn't do this, would be saying, okay, based off of income and number of children, does it have some sort of scaling threshold? That's something that I think we could look at should it become a problem for our budget, because the most important thing is making sure the funds reach the families who need them the most. And if it becomes a budget issue, we need to prioritize the families who can't afford it the most. With education coming in $4 million under into the budget, and us having a balanced budget, I don't see a current need to do that. But if the budget does come in for education over, that will have to be something that we look at. And that's not something that we can ignore as a state or as a party as well, because we have to be fiscally responsible. Republicans have to be the party of fiscal responsibility at the end of the day.
All right, let's go back to your philosophy that you brought up in your opening statement. Voters from both parties told the Clean Elections Survey they want lawmakers to work with people across the aisle to find solutions. You've already said that is something that you would do, but I want to ask you beyond that, how difficult would it be to find people, not just from the other party to work with you, but to find people in your own party that won't be upset that you're trying to work with the other party?
Oh, I love this question. This is a great question. So I have a great relationship with Alma Hernandez. I have a great relationship with Consuelo Hernandez. We don't grab lunch all the time, but we'll text back and forth sometimes. I love their bills. I always make sure to shout out Democrats when they do good things. I retweet Chris Mays whenever she does something that I like. And the same thing on the Republican side. I think that we've seen efforts from my running mate, Justin Wilmoth, from people such as Matt Gress and others to really make the effort to work with the other side. Thomas Galvin and Stephen Richer have retweeted a lot of my things before because they understand that, hey, the solutions in this state, they're not coming from the hyper-partisan side. We want to see representation from people who genuinely want to do good for Arizona and aren't bogged down in this ideological craziness that has taken control of what I feel is both parties. But I do think that there's a strong, I think it's coming from the younger people in both parties. And I think we're seeing a really strong backlash against the hyperpartisanship. And we're seeing that in the form of Annalise Ortiz introducing bipartisan housing bills, of Matt Grass working with both sides, being second youngest person, or Alex Colladin, another young guy, 30-something years old, the bipartisan Rio Verde bill. We're seeing bipartisanship, and it's coming from the folk who have seen how bad things have gotten, and we want to make a change. And I firmly believe that there's people on both sides of the aisle where we can work together to do that. Now, I'm completely, and I hope that I've shown in my history that I've been willing to do that and will continue to do that.
You haven't been shy about calling out fellow Republicans, I'll say Wendy Rogers in particular, over concerns related to bigotry, anti-Semitism. What's the message you want to send to people who seem comfortable with sharing that kind of rhetoric?
The anti-Semitism, the Groyper side of the Republican Party needs to be firmly stamped out. I don't want the votes of people who are that level of extremists. If people are followers of folk like Nick Fuentes or Wendy Rogers, and they believe in the cruel, inhumane, and despicable things that they say, such as Wendy supporting someone who has stolen valor. I'm a descendant of a Marine. She supported someone with stolen valor who had Confederate flags in his store. She called my friend, Representative David Marshall, a DEI candidate. I stand up to extremism. I call it out. One of the biggest reasons why I'm running, and especially why I'm running as a Republican, is because this extremism needs to be stamped out. I am a fiscal conservative. I am a strong classical liberal when it comes to our values. And the Republican Party, under people such as that, is becoming a distorted version of what it should be and what it needs to be for the next generation. And so I'm committed to, especially if elected in office, continuing to call out the John Fillmores and the Wendy Rogerses of the world, because that negativity, that bigotry is beyond gross. Wendy Rogers tweeted out to 350,000 people that I sold the drugs which killed my father to children. She is a sick human being. And I have no support for anyone who supports her.
What has the reaction been to you being so public in criticism of someone who's become a stalwart of the party?
You know, the people who are trying to make a change, they are so thankful. I get messages every single day of people who are thanking me. But you know what? I also get death threats every single day. I don't wake up. Since I've announced this campaign, I haven't woken up a single day without a threat of some kind. Most of the time, death threats. And they come from people who quite simply don't want to see Jewish people in this country. They don't want to see Jewish people in power. And they've weaponized my religion and my race into horrible, disgusting, and gross things. And they use their bigotry to go attack people who don't fit their ideological perfect view.
So why is it worth it for you to run for state legislature as opposed to coming at those people in a different way?
We need to have common sense in our legislature. I don't want to lose our legislature to radicals on the left or the right. And some of the bills which have tried to be introduced